Welcome. We're about to dive into some truly profound verses from Surah Al-Baqarah. Through the incredible commentary of Sayyid Abu Allah Madudi, we're going to explore the timeless principles that were laid down for a new community of believers. These are principles of justice, of sacrifice, and really the ultimate purpose of life itself. Let's just start with this one statement that honestly frames everything we're about to talk about. Maudi makes this powerful point that while killing is, of course, a terrible act, there is a condition that is even more severe, the state of fitna, or persecution. This single idea, it's the key to unlocking everything that follows. So you have to wonder, right? How did this brand new community in Medina, once scattered and depressed, how did they deal with threats to their very existence? Well, this section explores the very first command to fight, and maybe more importantly, the strict ethical boundaries that came right along with it. And what's so fascinating about this verse is that it was the first time the Muslims were given permission to take up arms. For years and years before this, the command was only to preach and to endure oppression with patience. Maududi explains that this wasn't some call for conquest. It was a command to respond with force only against those who were violently trying to crush the peaceful call for reform. So what does that actually mean, to not transgress? Well, the boundaries were made incredibly clear. This was not going to be a war in the pagan sense, as Maududi puts it. Force was only to be used when absolutely necessary, and it had to stay within these strict, humane limits. Prohibitions like these, they established a completely revolutionary code of conduct for conflict. Okay, let's circle back to that word, fitna. The commentary gives it two layers of meaning. The first one is this: persecution. It's when a group uses force, uses its power, to impose its own ideology on others, to stop them from even considering a different belief. According to Maududi, this is a greater evil than bloodshed, because it's an evil that suffocates the human spirit itself. You see, this struggle wasn't supposed to go on forever. It had a very clear stated goal, the end of fitna. And this brings us to the second, much broader meaning of that term. And this is really the crucial point here. Fitna isn't just about individual persecution. It's also a whole state of being for a society. It's a condition where people are not truly free to obey God because the entire system is built on the rule of men over men. So the goal of the believer's struggle was to replace this oppressive system with a just one, where every single person would have the freedom to choose to live in submission to God's law. All right, so after laying out the principles for dealing with threats from the outside, the Quran then shifts its focus. It turns inward, focusing on the spiritual and moral qualities that give a community its real, lasting strength. You have to remember, the Arabs had this ancient tradition of 4 sacred months, where all fighting was forbidden so people could make the pilgrimage safely. But what happens if your enemy attacks you during one of these sacred months? This verse established a really clear principle of reciprocity. The sanctity has to be respected by both sides. If the enemy violates it, then the believers are permitted to respond. Now, this next verse is a really powerful warning. Maududi clarifies that spending in the way of Allah means making real financial sacrifices to establish God's way. And the verse warns that if you start holding back, if you prioritize your own wealth over this cause, you are literally choosing your own destruction, both humiliation in this world and a pretty severe accounting in the next. And then the verse commands believers to adopt the way of ihsan. So what is that? Well, Maududi explains it as the difference between just doing your duty and doing it with excellence. See, the first level is just obedience, and that can be motivated by fear. But ihsan, that's a whole other level. It's motivated by a deep love and a desire to perform every single act as beautifully as possible for the sake of God. Okay, so now we're moving on to one of the absolute pillars of Islam, the Hajj pilgrimage. And what you'll see is that the rules and regulations around this journey aren't just empty rituals. They're actually a training ground for the soul. So what happens if you set out for Hajj? You're in that state of consecration, or ihram, but something stops you. You're physically prevented from reaching Mecca. Well, the Quran lays out a very clear step-by-step process for how to properly exit that state of ihram, even when the pilgrimage itself can't be completed. When you're on Hajj, you are in this very special, consecrated state, and that means your conduct has to be on a whole other level. There can be no lewd talk, no sinful acts, and not even any arguing. And Maududi notes this extends to something as simple as scolding a servant. It's just a total all-in commitment to peace and piety. This next part is just fascinating. The commentary explains that back in pre-Islamic Arabia, some people thought it was a sign of piety to travel for Hajj with, well, with nothing. No food, no supplies, just relying entirely on begging. The Quran corrects this completely misguided idea. It says, yes, of course, take physical provisions for your journey, but never forget that the best provision, the one that truly matters for the journey of life itself, is taqwa, that consciousness and healthy fear of God. You know, a huge theme running through these verses is this idea of purification. The Quran is systematically taking apart all the old pagan rituals and these public displays of arrogance that had corrupted the Hajj, and it's restoring it to its pure, Abrahamic roots. And we see two really powerful examples of this reform right here. The tribe of Quraysh, they were so arrogant that they refused to go stand with the common people at Arafat. But Islam commanded them to go where everyone goes, completely shattering this class distinction. And in the same way, the festivals after Hajj that were all about boasting about your ancestors, they were replaced with the remembrance of God. And this brings us to a really profound idea at the end of all this. After all the laws, all the rituals, the Quran shows us that you can tell almost everything about a person's character and their ultimate destiny by one simple thing: what they ask for when they pray.
So let's just pause on that for a second. It's a deeply personal question, right? Because the Quran presents two types of people, and they are defined entirely by the scope of their prayers.
And the contrast is just so stark. You have one person whose vision is completely limited to this life. They only pray for worldly success, and so their portion is limited to just that. But the true believer, they have a comprehensive vision. They get that this world and the hereafter are connected, so they ask for what is good in both realms, and their reward reflects that bigger, holistic view. But the Quran also gives this chilling warning about a certain kind of person: the hypocrite. On the outside, his words sound amazing, and he calls on God to witness what's in his heart. But in reality, well, Madudi's translation of the Arabic phrase, ashaddul khisam, is just so powerful. He is the most devious, the most crooked of adversaries, the one who will use any twisted argument to oppose the truth. And that brings us full circle, back to the ideal prayer, the believer's prayer. This is probably one of the most frequently recited verses in the entire Quran. And you can see why. It's comprehensive, it's balanced, it's humble, it doesn't reject the world, but it asks for the good of this world, while always keeping the ultimate goal of success in the hereafter firmly in sight. So we're going to end where we started, with that same question. Because the guidance in Surah Al-Baqarah, it isn't just a history lesson. It's really a mirror. By looking at what we desire most, what we ask for when we turn to God, we can begin to understand the true direction of our own hearts and the destination we are all ultimately seeking.